Have the icy fogs drifting over the Yorkshire moors ever sent shivers down your spine? Or the spectral hounds howling through the ancient woodlands of Sherwood? Those sounds resonate through the ages, bearing murmurs of long-forgotten hexes, beings that prowl the line between legend and truth, and pagan entities older than the very foundations of Saxon churches. Greetings from England, a land where folklore isn't just a children's story but an inherited recollection carved into the earth itself. I'm Obsidian Vault, and this evening we'll delve into the misty domain of ancient England, a place where each town hides sinister truths, each woodland harbors ravenous apparitions, and each junction echoes with the tread of the condemned. Steel yourselves for this evening. Together we'll break through the facade of decency to investigate 7 dark Gothic tales that have plagued the English populace since ages past. Ranging from Victorian London's jumping demon to Norfolk's ghostly pack, from Windsor's antlered deity to Durham's primordial dragon. These aren't stories fabricated for childish amusement. They are shared terrors exposing the cost of advancement and the darkness that hides just below society's polished surface. Should you, as I do, find yourself captivated by the obscurity lurking in England's overlooked crevices, please subscribe to our channel and turn on alerts. Comment below and tell us which of these myths gave you the greatest fright. So now, commence our expedition through the gloom of Albion. Jack, the vaulting fiend of Victorian London. Pay close attention, because I will. Recount to you a being that plagued the world's mightiest metropolis during its most self-assured era. Amid the thoroughfares of Victorian London, where advancement reigned and science vowed to eliminate every superstition, roamed an entity that contradicted all logical understanding. Spring-heeled Jack, the bounding demon vaulting over edifices, exhaling azure fire, and instilling dread in those who assumed modernity had vanquished old-world anxieties. Envision London in 1837, the year a youthful Victoria assumed the crown. London spread like a breathing entity, nourished by the gloomy, infernal factories of the industrial era. Steam locomotives coughed soot into murky haze, while gaslights threw flickering amber patches that appeared to animate the darkness with wicked vitality. Right here, within this concrete maze where opulence and destitution coexisted in jarring closeness, Jack initially revealed himself. The entity manifested as a lanky, slender form, clad in a form-fitting suit that shimmered like greased hide or buffed alloy. His most remarkable traits included eyes glowing like embers in a smithy's hearth and hands sheathed in steel talons that could rip the thickest woolen overcoat. Observers recounted his power to jump unimaginable spans, vaulting from roof to roof with supernatural agility, or leaping straight over horse-drawn vehicles, and the panic-stricken riders inside. Yet it was his vicious cleverness that rendered him genuinely horrifying. Contrary to a thoughtless animal, he derived twisted satisfaction from mental anguish. He would materialize abruptly before solitary wayfarers, especially young ladies, exhaling cerulean fire from his lips while emitting unearthly screams that resonated blocks away. Then, before his prey could make a sound, he'd then spring off into the blackness, abandoning them shocked but unscathed. The myth originated with Lucy Scales, an 18-year-old lass returning home via Green Dragon Alley in October 1837. Based on her statement to the Lambeth Street constables, a being shrouded in a black cape emerged from the gloom, exhaling azure fire straight into her countenance, then vaulting off with preternatural nimbleness. She was discovered many hours afterward with singed hair, ripped garments, muttering about a demon with fiery eyes. What ensued was a period of dread that held London captive for years. Jack seemed to manifest wherever anxiety ran deepest, in the cramped lanes of Whitechapel, the mist-enshrouded fields of Blackheath, the polished squares of Kensington, taking pleasure in frightening the very people who felt safest in their contemporary affluence. The most celebrated incident took place in February 1838, when Jane Olop responded to a desperate pounding on her family's entrance in Bearbind Lane. A fellow asserting to be a policeman panted that they'd trapped spring-heeled Jack in the lane and required illumination to hold the captive when Jane stepped out holding a candle. The false officer shed his cape, uncovering the blazing eyes and steel talons of Jack himself. He exhaled fire at the maiden, tearing her gown and locks with his claws, until her shrieks summoned her relatives. As they neared, Jack sprang off with a gloating chuckle, vaulting cleanly over a 9-foot barrier as simply as crossing a puddle. The officials, humiliated by their failure to apprehend what newspapers called the terror of London, brushed aside the accounts as collective hallucination or intricate pranks. Yet the encounters persisted, spreading past the metropolis into rural areas. In 1845, Jack surfaced in Norwich, frightening a neighborhood woodworker called Jacob Smith by vaulting over his cottage while exhaling azure fire. In 1867, he appeared in Liverpool, prompting multiple soldiers to shoot at him, yet their bullets passed harmlessly through what should have been solid flesh. Perhaps most unsettling was Jack's apparent immortality. Those who crossed paths with him in 1870 described the same youthful, athletic figure that had terrorized London during the 1830s. He displayed no signs of aging, no reduction in his supernatural prowess, as though time itself could not touch whatever dark force animated his form. The Victorian effort to explain Jack through scientific reasoning only deepened the enigma. Some speculated he was an inventor testing springs and mechanical gadgets, accounting for his leaping talent through technology rather than occult forces. Others suggested an eccentric aristocrat playing elaborate tricks using primitive gas devices to create the flame-breathing illusion. Yet these theories fell apart when confronted with eyewitness reports of Jack vaulting impossible distances or surviving direct gunshots. The truth whispered among those who remembered ancient traditions was far more alarming. Spring-heeled Jack symbolized the return of something old and fundamental, a spirit of chaos and mischief that had been pushed underground by the rise of Christian civilization but never truly eliminated. In the sprawling urban landscape of Victorian London, where traditional communities had been uprooted by industrialization and millions lived as strangers among one another, the old protections no longer worked. Jack embodied the dark side of progress, the cost of abandoning the sacred ties that once linked human communities to the earth and to each other. His flames were not mere party tricks, but fires of judgment, unveiling the spiritual emptiness beneath Victorian prosperity. His leaps defied not only gravity, but also the very materialism that claimed to have charted and measured all existence. The final confirmed sighting of Spring-heeled Jack took place in 1,904 inches Everton, where he appeared to a group of children playing in the street. Faithful to his nature, he exhaled blue flames, let out his signature shriek, and leaped away across the rooftops. Yet perhaps his vanishing was not a defeat, but a tactical retreat in a world increasingly dominated by electric lights and motor cars. The shadows where Jack flourished were growing scarcer. Still, the legend endures, adapted to contemporary fears. Urban explorers report strange encounters in abandoned tunnels beneath London. Security cameras occasionally capture figures moving with impossible speed and agility across rooftops. Some claim Jack has evolved, swapping his Victorian attire for modern materials while keeping his supernatural abilities intact. Spring-heeled, Jack reminds us that no matter how advanced our civilization becomes, we cannot fully escape the forces that lurk beyond reason's reach. In our cities of glass and steel, we may believe ourselves masters of nature, but the old spirits wait patiently for moments when our confidence wavers. When the lights go out, we recall that some mysteries refuse to be solved by technology alone. The next time you walk alone through city streets at night, listen to the echoes bouncing between buildings, the scrape of metal on stone, and the whisper of something moving just outside your field of vision. Most likely, it's just the urban landscape settling into darkness. But sometimes, just sometimes, it could be Jack himself, still leaping through the night, still breathing his blue flames. He still reminds us that the modern world has not conquered all the ancient fears that reside in the human heart. Black Shuck, the phantom hound of East Anglia. From the marshlands of Norfolk to the windswept shores of Suffolk comes a legend that strikes terror into the souls of even the bravest. Black Shuck, the ghostly hound whose eyes burn like coals from hell's own furnace, whose mere sight brings death to those unfortunate enough to meet its gaze. This is no ordinary ghost story, but an encounter with something far older and more dreadful than human memory can hold. Imagine the bleak fens of East Anglia, where fog rises from dark waters and ancient churches stand like stone guardians against the advancing darkness. Here, in this landscape that seems to hover between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, prowls a creature that has haunted the local populace for over 1,000 years. Black Shuck is not just a spectral dog, but a herald of doom, a keeper of boundaries that should never be crossed, and a reminder that some territories belong to powers far more ancient than human civilization. This creature manifests as an enormous hound, dwarfing any mundane canine, with fur so dark it appears to swallow light instead of reflecting it. Its eyes glow with an internal flame said to shine either crimson like fresh blood or green like swamp gas, varying with the lunar cycle and the viewer's destiny. Certain accounts describe Shuck as having a single fiery eye set in the middle of his brow, resembling a demonic cyclops. Meanwhile, others insist he possesses two eyes, capable of peering into one's very soul and weighing the burden of their transgressions. The size of this being shifts depending on the story. At times he is merely sizable, comparable to a mastiff or a wolfhound. Yet during instances of intense paranormal manifestation, onlookers recount a creature the magnitude of a horse, its breath visible as steam even on balmy summer evenings. Its paws sear glowing imprints into the ground. Its howl travels for miles over the vast level marshes. A cry so sorrowful and dreadful that it could send even the bravest men into insanity and induce miscarriage in pregnant women from pure fright. The most renowned sighting of Black Shuck took place on the 4th of August, 1577, amid a thunderstorm that swept over Suffolk with otherworldly ferocity. Worshippers at St. Mary's Church in Bang had assembled for the morning service, seeking solace from the storm that appeared to rattle the very bedrock of their stone sanctuary. While Reverend Abraham Fleming preached, a bolt of lightning tore through the heavens with such force that the church bells chimed untouched by any hand. Then, without warning, the massive oak doors of the church flew open. No natural gale could have thrust them open against the iron bolts that fastened them firmly. Through the entrance leaped Black Shuck, his enormous shape shrouded in brimstone fog, his eyes burning with profane flame. The parishioners stood petrified in horror as the spectral dog advanced along the nave, its claws tapping on the old flagstones with a noise resembling splintering bones. Near the altar, two men were kneeling in prayer. Thomas Rabbit, a tiller of the land renowned for his charity to the needy, and William Dowsing, a trader whose transactions were frequently doubted by his community. As Shuck drew near, his fiery stare rested on each man, one after the other. Rabbit, lifting his eyes to witness the monster descending upon him, squeezed his hands more firmly in devotion and murmured a prayer of belief. The great dog halted, cocked its huge head, and then moved on, leaving Rabbit unharmed. However, as those dreadful eyes locked onto Dowsing, the trader's complexion turned pale with dread. He attempted to flee, but Shuck closed in immediately. A single brush of its flaming paw caused Dowsing to collapse onto the stone pavement, his form shriveled and charred like a lightning strike. As the spectral hound continued its journey across the church, it grazed a young lad called Geoffrey Flint. The boy lived on but carried the scar of Shuck's contact throughout his life. His locks became snowy white, and his left hand stayed discolored and insensible until he passed away 6 decades later. After delivering its verdict, Black Shuck sprang in the direction of the bell tower. As it leaped, its supernatural shape went straight through the masonry, leaving scorched imprints still visible to this day. The impact of its movement fractured the church bells, their brass structures warped into forms like howling visages. The spire itself suffered harm, with stones tumbling down to leave a gap that local builders deemed structurally unfeasible. Reverend Fleming recorded this event with exacting precision, and his account remains kept in the parish archives. This dark hound, or perhaps Satan assuming that guise, raced down the entire length of the church with immense speed and astonishing urgency, moving among the gathered congregation. Take on a discernible appearance. It slipped between two individuals who were on their knees engaged in prayer. In that moment, it appeared to twist the necks of both of them cleanly, all within a single instant. So completely reversed that even while kneeling, they met a bizarre death. Yet Bang was not the sole victim of Shuck on that dreadful morning. 7 miles distant at St. Andrew's Church in Blithburg, the spectral hound materialized amidst that identical tempest. In that place, his apparition proved far more horrifying. While the worshippers cowered in their seats, Black Shuck leaped through the church, his talons carving deep furrows into the aged oak portal. Those scars remain visible to present-day visitors, locally referred to as the Devil's Fingerprints. In Blithbor, the canine's devastation was even greater. He claimed 2 additional churchgoers and wounded numerous others, his fiery contact branding them permanently. The clock tower of the church received a strike that eyewitnesses called otherworldly lightning. However, doubters observed that no ordinary electrical storm could have produced that particular damage pattern. Rocks melded in unimaginable arrangements, metal contorted into esoteric emblems, and burn marks creating designs akin to archaic runic writing. The myth of Black Shuck stretches well beyond these recorded incidents. Across East Anglia, households transmitted tales of the ghostly canine's manifestations during epochs of significant transformation or imminent catastrophe. He was witnessed roaming the fields of the English Civil War, his wails, proclaiming which faction would taste defeat. Fishermen recount sightings of Black Shuck on the Norfolk shoreline, where his emergence foretells gales capable of swallowing whole navies. In the Second World War, multiple Royal Air Force aviators claimed to have observed an enormous ebony canine sprinting beside their planes on hazardous sorties above Nazi-held lands. Those who beheld Shuck and survived talked about a sense of being safeguarded, as though the primeval protector had elected to defend them from injury. Yet aircraft that met the spectral hound and exhibited terror or uncertainty in their objective frequently never came back, their teams adding to the innumerable spirits that Black Shuck has taken throughout the ages. The mental repercussions of meeting Shuck go further than simple superstition. Observers recount a deep transformation in their view of existence. It is as though encountering the ghostly canine rips apart the reassuring deceptions that keep the ordinary world distinct from the paranormal domain. Numerous individuals describe acquiring an eerie talent to foresee approaching mortality or calamity, a boon that carries the frightful weight of foreseeing impending tragedy while lacking the power to avert it. Contemporary scientists endeavoring to account for Black Shuck using logical methods have advanced multiple hypotheses. Certain experts propose that the myth began with encounters with genuine big black canines, possibly released mastiffs or even wolves in the medieval era when these animals still wandered England's woodlands. Others reference atmospheric occurrences. They contend that globe lightning, or similar weather anomalies, might produce the illusion of an otherworldly beast amid violent tempests. Yet these hypotheses fall apart when faced with the uniformity of testimony over centuries and the surviving tangible proof. The scratch impressions at Bleaburg Church have been analyzed by current forensic specialists. They verify that no recognized creature could have made grooves with such profundity and unique arrangement. Likewise, the burn scars in Bang resist typical interpretation, exhibiting evidence of extreme thermal application that no 1500s techniques could have generated. The reality kept alive in the oral tradition of East Anglian clans unveils the profound meaning of Black Shuck. He functions as a psychopomp, a protective entity. He acts concurrently as arbiter and punisher for individuals who transgress the primordial statutes that manage the connection between humanity and the environment. His manifestations signify instances when the boundary between existence and mortality becomes tenuous, when universal equity requires reconciliation of debts that mortal jurisprudence cannot handle. Shuck's position as a metaphysical magistrate clarifies why meetings with him appear to adhere to ethical rather than arbitrary frameworks. Individuals who encounter him with unblemished consciences and innocent spirits frequently receive safety instead of retribution. However, those burdened by hidden transgressions or unapologetic malevolence realize that Shuck's fiery stare can see straight into their innermost beings. It deems them insufficient, and so does the phantom hound. It acts as a protector of holy grounds and age-old frontiers. Most sightings happen close to ancient monuments, standing stones, burial mounds, old junctions where ley lines converge. In such spots, Shuck watches over the boundary separating the physical from the ethereal realm, making sure specific gateways stay safe from individuals trying to misuse occult powers for selfish purposes. The transformation of East Anglia's environment has changed, but not erased Shuck's territory. With wetlands drained and primeval woods removed for farming, His manifestations have relocated to different sites. Nowadays, encounters with Shuck frequently happen around deserted airports, factories erected on hallowed land, highways slicing through ancient terrains, as though the ghostly hound keeps up his endless watch. Even with mankind's efforts to transform the terrain, the myth endures in modern East Anglia, adjusted to present-day conditions, yet keeping its core strength. People walking their dogs describe meetings with an unbelievably huge canine that abruptly shows up on isolated trails. It stares at them with fiery eyes and then disappears without a single footprint. Motorists on remote rural roads recount a giant dog that runs beside their cars for long stretches before vanishing into the night. Such contemporary reports frequently come before major occurrences, like family deaths, natural calamities, or communal misfortunes. Shuck's function as an omen has developed, yet not weakened. His paranormal perception includes dangers his medieval appearances never faced. Certain eyewitnesses claim his blazing eyes now mirror not only judgment's flames, but also the shine of digital gadgets, as though the primeval watcher has adjusted to track mankind's latest wellsprings of moral decay. Black Shuck reminds us that however completely we think we have charted and tamed the English landscape, old forces continue to prowl areas that existed before humans arrived. The spectral dog symbolizes the endurance of natural order in a society ever more detached from environmental consequences. A reminder that certain limits cannot be breached without encountering verdicts from beings that acknowledge no mortal sovereignty. This night, as fog spreads over the East Anglian flatlands and haze climbs from dark waters, pay close attention to the noise of large feet treading age-old roots. Watch for shadows that shift on their own, for eyes that shine in gloom where no animal ought to exist. Because Black Shuck continues. His endless rounds still passes judgment on the spirits of those who meet him, still protects the holy frontiers between our familiar realm and the enigmas outside human comprehension. Herne the Hunter, the horned god of Windsor Forest. Within the primeval core of Windsor Forest, where oaks more ancient than recollection throw shade that has seen empires ascend and crumble, prowls a being that represents England's most profound and primitive dreads. Herne the Hunter, the antlered spectre who gallops forever through the darkness. He guides his spectral hounds on a pursuit that does not target simple game like deer or boar, rather souls that have lost their bond with the untamed regions of the world. Imagine Windsor Great Park as it appeared ages before it transformed into the trimmed recreation area of monarchs. This was an ancient woodland where enormous oaks created natural cathedral ceilings of living timber. There, brooks flowed pure and icy from springs infused with primeval enchantment. There, the line separating humankind from the dominion of ancient deities stayed thin for those familiar with correct ceremonies and sacrifices. Herne shows up as a giant presence, his human shape topped by the splendid antlers of a mighty stag. His countenance carries the rugged characteristics of someone who has lived in wilderness areas from the dawn of time. His skin is like bark. His eyes reflect the deepness of woodland pools, and his hair and beard are tangled with moss and creeping ivy. He is neither entirely human nor animal, but a being far more ancient, an embodiment of the forest's own awareness, manifested in a horrifying shape. The hunter's form bears the marks of infinite eras, gashes from iron blades, evidence of mankind's conflict with nature, scars from flames that have razed old-growth woods, hollows where mechanical devices have ripped into hallowed ground. But these symbols of human progress appear to empower rather than weaken his otherworldly might. Each transgression against nature only increases the rage fueling his eternal pursuit. The hunt. What makes Herne truly fearsome is his pack. These are no earthly dogs. They are phantom creatures with eyes glowing like embers and breath that exhales an unearthly chill. These spectral predators trail their lord across realms hidden from human eyes. They move through physical objects like drifting fog, and their eerie cries resonate throughout the tangible world as well as the nightmares of anyone slumbering for miles around. The tale solidified in the era of Richard II, when Windsor Forest was the royal hunting grounds. Sir Philip Mowbray, the king's houndmaster, boasted that he knew each deer trail and secret clearing in that immense wood. He was a Norman-born man who saw the English land as something to subdue, not as holy ground to revere. Mowbray ignored the forester's cautions about particular groves that ought to be left untouched. On Samhain, in 1391, as the waning October sun shone through leaves crimson like blood, Mowbray arranged a hunt meant to demonstrate his absolute dominance over Windsor Forest. He had spotted an enormous white stag, a beast so grand and regal that catching it would secure his status as England's foremost hunter. Villagers murmured that the white stag was wholly a courier from beyond and should never be hurt. Yet Mowbray mocked these beliefs as ignorant country nonsense. The chase started at daybreak, with Mowbray guiding a group along well-known forest trails. However, as they chased the white stag further into the woods, the terrain began to change around them. Routes they had used for years brought them to meadows that had no right to be there, and creeks ran upwards, breaking the rules of nature. The location of the sun in the sky no longer matched the time of day. It seemed they had stepped into a dimension where the laws of physics did not apply. As dusk neared, no one could tell if it was still the same day they started, or if it was a completely different day. The group ended up in a clearing that none of them recognized, even though they knew the forest well. In that spot were oaks so old that entire families could have lived inside their trunks. The foliage above was so dense that it appeared as if stars dangled from the boughs like fruit. At the heart of this unbelievable clearing was the white stag, but now it had changed. Its antlers had transformed into a glowing crown of living radiance. Its eyes blazed with an intelligence that conveyed knowledge gathered over thousands of years. Around its neck were wreaths of blossoms that flowered, faded, and flowered once more in a perpetual rhythm of mortality and renewal. As Mowbray lifted his crossbow, the stag addressed him in a tone resembling the rustle of wind through aged foliage. "Norman intruder, do you think your iron and pride can seize what was hallowed long before your kind ever arrived on this isle? These woods have protectors far older than your Christ guardians that recall the days when your forebears hid in caves on the continent, in times when the ancient deities roamed freely through England's verdant dales. Yet Mowbray's arrogance prevented him from accepting what he was witnessing. He fired his bolt straight at the stag's chest, certain that his marksmanship would finish this eerie confrontation. The shot hit its target, yet instead of bringing down the beast, the projectile sailed through it without effect, as if hitting nothing but vapor. The stag let out a laugh that resembled chimes of silver blended with the howl of a winter gale. "So be it, hunter," it declared. "You deliberately disregarded the age-old statutes, asserting control over primal forces that molded this earth long before humans stood erect. Now, discover the experience of being quarry instead of pursuer, of being stalked instead of stalking." The metamorphosis commenced with torment that defied human understanding. Mowbray experienced his skull splitting apart as bony growths emerged from his brow. These sprouted into the forked antlers that would eternally brand him as Herne the Huntsman. His mortal attire vanished like vapor, substituted by raiment spun from darkness and lunar glow. His aristocratic followers dispersed in horror while their master's cries reverberated throughout the woods. Yet the very trees appeared to curve inward, ensnaring them within the clearing until the transformation finished. When morning ultimately broke and observers argued if it had been mere hours or countless years, the hunting group stepped out of Windsor Wood, irrevocably altered. They murmured about a dreadful entity adorned with antlers that materialized precisely when Mowbray underwent his change. Thus, a being known as the Forest Father had uttered a malediction. The hex would chain the haughty huntsman to an everlasting life, as the protector of those same wildernesses he aimed to conquer. Herne's penalty was to pursue endlessly, yet never seize his quarry. His fate was to chase the spirits of those who transgressed against nature's harmony. The pursuit might span centuries, demonstrating to them the repercussions of regarding the land as mere commodity to be plundered. The most dreadful aspect was that he kept his human mind, perpetually cognizant of his loss. Due to his arrogant dismissal of forces beyond human aspiration, a curse was placed upon him. Initial accounts of Herne's otherworldly chases surfaced mere months after Mowbray vanished. Woodcutters laboring deep within Windsor reported hearing the blare of hunting horns reverberating across the darkness. The howling of dogs appeared to emanate from all directions simultaneously. Daring individuals who investigated found hoof marks seared into the soil, arranged in designs that caused pain to gaze upon directly. In 1394, King Richard personally came across Herne while riding at midnight through the woods. The royal chronicles state that the spectral huntsman materialized on the trail before the king's retinue. His antler-crowned head rose above the fog that shrouded his lower form. "Plantagenet," he uttered in a tone akin to breeze rustling withered foliage. "Your Norman lineage has reigned over this territory for 300 years, yet the woodland recalls more ancient monarchs, an endless chase." Richard, likely more prudent than his huntsman had shown, descended from his horse and walked toward the ghostly being with due deference. He paid homage to the forest's primordial privileges. He vowed to enact legislation safeguarding the hallowed woodland and ordered the founding of refuges where ancient traditions might persist unbothered. In exchange, Herne bestowed upon him secure travel and safeguarding from his adversaries. However, this safeguarding turned out to be constrained, as political currents beyond even the hunter's influence ultimately cost Richard his crown and existence. Across the subsequent centuries, Herne's manifestations coincided with periods of turmoil within English history. He was observed galloping through Windsor Wood on the eve of the Battle of Agincourt. His ghostly hounds bayed in exultation for the impending triumph. Throughout the English Civil War, troops loyal to both the Crown and Parliament documented sightings of the antlered huntsman. He appeared to assess their missions according to how they treated the populace and the terrain. In the period leading up to his execution, Charles I asserted that he encountered Herne while taking his last stroll across Windsor's estate. According to legend, the phantom hunter informed the condemned monarch that lineage held no significance for forces far more ancient than any earthly crown. He further warned that a ruler who neglected his obligation to safeguard both his subjects and the realm merited any doom that awaited him. As the blade of the executioner descended, onlookers claimed to hear the faint resonance of hunting horns reverberating from afar. The Victorian age introduced fresh obstacles to Herne's watchkeeping as industrial expansion started to invade England's untamed territories. Documented accounts from that time portrayed the hunter's manifestations as increasingly desperate and fearsome compared to earlier centuries. Laborers laying rails through primeval forests recounted sightings of a horned entity materializing on the rails before their locomotives, compelling them to stop as his ghostly horde crossed their route. Individuals who disregarded his admonitions frequently experienced inexplicable engine breakdowns or rail misalignments, resulting in delays that thwarted the demolition of especially hallowed locations. Present-day interactions with Herne have evolved to address modern dangers yet preserve their fundamental nature. Eco-activists claim to glimpse him during demonstrations opposing construction in old-growth woodlands. His apparition bolsters their cause, occasionally making equipment fail at critical junctures. Adventurers who explore the surviving patches of Windsor's ancient forest recount sensations of being observed by invisible watchers. And perceiving the far-off echo of horns through the darkness, the mental effect of meeting Herne goes well beyond simple paranormal dread. Those who have seen him speak of a deep transformation in their comprehension of humankind's connection to nature. Numerous individuals say they gain a heightened consciousness of ecological harm, as though the hunter's visitation has stirred within them the identical perception that fuels his perpetual watchfulness. Some turn into lifelong advocates for conservation, committing themselves to safeguarding the untamed landscapes they now view as holy rather than just picturesque. The phenomenon of the Herne hunt stands as a potent allegory for the repercussions of regarding nature as a product instead of a partner. His ceaseless chase after those who transgress natural order embodies the hidden guilt that plagues a society founded upon the organized depletion of the planet's assets. In psychological language, the hunter personifies the resurgence of suppressed instincts, the ancient bond with wilderness, that industrial civilization has sought to eliminate yet can never entirely annihilate. Archaeological findings bolster the legend's age-old origins. Digs within Windsor Woods have revealed objects indicating uninterrupted ceremonial activity in specific clearings over thousands of years. Cromlechs older than Stonehenge, ceremonial caches of antlers and skeletal remains, cavern murals depicting antlered individuals directing hunts. These all indicate a custom of woodland reverence that Christianity adopted, yet never fully replaced. The horned deity pattern embodied by Herne emerges in civilizations across the globe, implying it transcends mere regional folklore. Cernunnos among the Celts, Pan of the Greeks, the Green Man in medieval Christianity each encapsulates the same core essence that appears in English myth. Such uniformity across cultures suggests the hunter is not simply a figment of imagination, but an interaction with a genuine non-human consciousness that various societies have deciphered using their own symbolic systems. Global warming has infused Hearn's manifestations with renewed significance. Park rangers and environmental stewards note a rise in encounters amid episodes of severe climate or ecological strain. Several recount sensing the hunter amid forest fires, as if his age-old force strives to safeguard the remnants of England's pristine forests. Still others report sightings during reforestation initiatives, indicating that Hearn's function has shifted from sheer retribution to encompassing active protection of recovery endeavors. The myth of Hearn the Hunter functions as both a caution and an enticement. It cautions that regarding the natural realm solely as a commodity for human gain entails repercussions reaching past physical reckoning into spheres of metaphysical debt. Yet it also calls for acknowledging that untamed vitality still thrives on Earth. Contemporary travelers to Windsor Great Park occasionally recount eerie occurrences as they traverse the time-worn trails. Shadows drifting free from what casts them, the echo of hooves along trails forbidden to any horse, antlers spotted in the trees where no stag ought to roam. Many brush off such sightings as mere fancy or tricks of the eye. Yet there are those who grasp that they have, for an instant, seen something far more ancient and profound than their own being. As you reflect upon your bond with nature this evening, bear in mind that the hunt of Hearn carries on. The hunter's watchfulness stretches past the borders of Windsor Forest, covering every endangered wilderness, every primeval thicket condemned to be cleared, all river sources tainted by industrial greed. His spectral hounds race not only across English forests, but through the shared psyche of an entire race, a race that has lost its role in the fabric of existence. Hear the faint blare of hunting horns reverberating in the blackness. Sense the gaze of age-old eyes peering from the gloom amidst the trunks. And recall that certain chases are not after prey, but after righteousness. That some hunters answer to no earthly lord, but to decrees far older than any society. Hearn, the eternal huntsman, rides onward, his crown of antlers gleaming in the starry light. He guides his hounds to find spirits who must be reminded of the wild pulse that throbs beneath all human artifice. The lantern worm, serpent of the river, hails from the undulating hills of County Durham. There, the ware cuts its age-old route through both rock and recollection. Out of those hills rises a narrative so terrifying that parents employ it even now to scare wayward youngsters into compliance. The Lambton worm, a dragon of monstrous size and wickedness, could wrap itself around Penor Hill 7 full times. It embodies the dreadful cost of pride and the ruination that follows meddling with powers meant to stay buried under the ground. Imagine the Lambton estate in the 1300s, where the river ware ran pure and gentle beside fields where cows fed, blissfully unaware of the nightmares that would soon shadow those pastures. Lambton Castle rose here, dwelling of a clan whose Norman ancestry had rendered them rulers of everything their eyes could see, ever since the Norman invasion. Yet dominion over the soil does not ensure command over the primeval forces that slumber underneath a truth young John Lambton would discover to his everlasting regret. The story commences on a Sunday in 1420, as every devout soul was assembled in the village chapel for matins. However, John Lambton, the future lord of expansive lands and numberless serfs, decided to pass his Sabbath by angling in the river instead of fulfilling his Christian obligations. This was not just a childish revolt. It was a purposeful blasphemy, a willful decision to put his own enjoyment ahead of God's law. When the young noble tossed his line into the hallowed stream, for all moving water was seen as sacred in pre-Christian lore, he instantly felt a fierce tug. Yet what he drew from the deep was no common fish. The thing that squirmed on his hook was utterly black, its eyes resembling glowing embers, and its jaw packed with teeth that could shear through metal. It measured no more than a forearm, yet its wicked awareness was instantly clear from how it stared into John's face and appeared to grin, as if expecting vengeance ahead. Local farmers, streaming out of the morning, mass, clustered to gape at the unnatural prize. Aged Margaret Whitton, whose line had dwelled by the Wear since Saxon days, made the sign of the cross and murmured, "Young sir, cast that fiend back where it came from. No blessing can follow dragging such a being from the sanctified river on the Sabbath." But John Lambton, intoxicated by the pride of his youth and rank, just mocked such folk belief. "This worm will adorn my room," he announced, "a prize of my fishing prowess to entertain my visitors." Disregarding every warning and the swelling throng of frightened locals, he transported his trophy to an abandoned well situated behind the castle's horse stables, then cast it into the dark, fathomless water. For 7 years, while John embarked on the Crusades in pursuit of honor and redemption within the Holy Land, he completely dismissed his earlier catch. Yet, the worm never lost memory of him. Nourished by the well's shadowy liquid and upheld by energies predating all mortal recollection, its growth proceeded at a pace that violated every physical rule. When word finally escaped to the outer realm, the beast had transformed into a snake of such colossal dimensions that its mere existence poisoned the landscape for leagues in every direction. The monster that surfaced from the well looked nothing like the tiny organism John had originally captured. It now measured almost 60 feet from head to tail. Its trunk was as massive as a fortress turret, sheathed in impenetrable scales that turned aside every blade. Its cranium had evolved into a hybrid of snake and dragon, featuring maws that could engulf a full-grown human in a single gulp, and its eyes blazed with hellish flames. Yet its most horrifying aspect was its preternatural powers. Any injury healed completely within mere hours. Its exhalation could contaminate whole settlements, and a single contact could transform rich farmland into desolate desert. The Lambton worm made its den by entwining itself about Penshaw Hill, a site of antique importance where early humans had once performed hallowed ceremonies. From that vantage, it could watch over the entire valley while siphoning energy from the ley lines that converged under the peak. It coiled its enormous body around the hill exactly 7 times, since 7 represented wholeness in ancient mystic beliefs, thereby declaring the whole region its territory. The beast's hunger matched its immense stature. Every morning at first light, it would unravel from Penshaw Hill and roam the land, swallowing whatever crossed its route. Whole herds of cows, sheep, and horses disappeared en masse, devoured alive to fuel the worm's monstrous expansion. However, animals only whetted the creature's appetite for its genuine craving, human meat, especially that of young ones whose purity had not been tainted by grown-up transgressions. As the worm's territory spread, entire settlements were deserted. Those who stayed employed every ancestral safeguard they could recall. They suspended iron horseshoes above entrances, sprinkled salt in consecrated rings, and set fire to rowan branches and other protective plants to erect defenses against dark forces. Yet the Lambton worm had advanced far beyond the control of such elementary talismans. The parish clergyman, Father Benedict Harrowing, coordinated the removal of endangered communities while trying multiple Christian rites of exorcism. However, his blessed water evaporated instantly when the monster drew near. His crosses split and disintegrated, and his incantations were overwhelmed by the worm's unearthly bellowing. The creature appeared to gain power from every unsuccessful effort to vanquish it, almost as if it nourished itself on the hopelessness of those calling upon heaven. Armed confrontation also proved useless. Sir Geoffrey Middleton commanded a contingent of 50 armed soldiers to confront the creature. Wielding the best tools 15th-century blacksmithing could forge, the worm met their assault with what seemed like amusement. It let them strike at its armored hide while healing each wound quicker than they could create new ones. At last, wearied by the unequal fight, the beast devoured the whole company in under 60 minutes. Nothing remained but Sir Geoffrey's blade to indicate they ever lived. The mental damage inflicted by the worm's existence spread well past its direct feeding grounds. News trickled in from adjoining shires of paranormal events. Springs that transformed into gore, farm animals delivering malformed young, and infants uttering tongues that came before mankind's dawn. The beast's evil energy appeared to project outward, analogous to concentric rings from a pebble thrown into a placid pond, polluting all in its reach. After 7 years of wreaking havoc across the region, the worm's frightful dominion was ultimately terminated when John Lambton came back from the Crusades. The youthful noble, who had left with haughty naivety, came back a battle-scarred veteran, shaped by conflicts with otherworldly foes in the Holy Land. Yet crucially, he brought back insights into ancient practices obtained from Arabian enchanters and Byzantine occultists who recalled sorcerous customs predating Christendom. Upon discovering the disaster ignited by his juvenile foolishness, John's initial move was to find the fabled wise woman of Fatfield. Her mastery of mystical regulation was murmured about across all of northern England. Her dwelling was a small house erected upon the ruins of an ancient stone circle, encircled by gardens where herbs formed patterns so disorienting that gazing directly at them caused pain. The wise woman, ageless and unfathomably old, still had eyes gleaming with perpetual youth, and she received John's confession with neither astonishment nor condemnation. "Young master," she uttered in a tone reminiscent of autumn breezes rustling dry leaves, "you drew death forth from hallowed waters and nurtured it through your carelessness. Now that death has become mighty enough to consume all that you hold dear, a method exists to annihilate your creation, yet its cost will far exceed your expectations." The rite she commanded merged aspects of Christian belief with a form of sorcery far more ancient than any established religion. John's protective gear had to be studded with sharp tips. Each square of metal was converted into a blade, capable of penetrating the serpent's hide. He was required to face the monster at sunrise on the exact date of its first appearance. At times when the veil between realms became permeable, otherworldly beings were particularly susceptible to human arms. Yet, the most horrifying demand involved a sacrificial payment of blood. Subsequent to destroying the worm, John had to take the life of the first entity he met. Its existence had to be surrendered to restore equilibrium to the universal order that his initial transgression had upset. Failure, the wise woman cautioned, would invoke a hex upon the Lambton lineage. Throughout 9 successive generations, not a single ruler of Lamp would pass away serenely in his sleep. The ultimate confrontation occurred at daybreak on a misty morning when vapors ascended from the waterway like exhalations of slumbering titans. John, clad in armor covered with needle-like projections, stationed himself upon the bridge where the old thoroughfare intersected the hallowed river. As dawn's earliest rays illuminated Penshaw Hill, the lampworm emerged from its den and advanced to engage its progenitor in a one-on-one struggle. The ensuing battle surpassed conventional combat, evolving into a clash between the primordial energies of Genesis and annihilation that had molded the universe from its dawn. Every instance, the serpent's enormous loops entwined John's armored body. The spikes adorning his figure cut into the monster's tissue as effortlessly as blades cutting fabric. The entity's extraordinary healing ability, which rendered it impervious to typical armaments, turned into its downfall. Because every regeneration consumed vitality, and the perpetual injuries caused by John's pointed protection sapped its power more swiftly than it could restore. However, the worm's final thrashing almost devastated the entire vicinity for leagues around. The outpouring of its blood into the stream discolored the holy waters to an inky hue for many subsequent months. Its last bellow burst pains at Durham Cathedral, 20 miles away, and caused avian creatures to fall from the heavens over 3 shires. As the beast at last became motionless, its colossal form began to decompose into a putrefaction so vile that the bridge's very masonry became irreversibly darkened. The instant of triumph transformed into one of catastrophe. John's father, upon hearing the commotion of combat from the stronghold, had hurried to support his offspring. The elderly noble reached the scene precisely as the serpent expired, thus becoming the initial being John faced, following his victory. Compelled by the sage woman's command, John had no choice but to unsheath his blade against the very individual who had bestowed existence upon him. He fulfilled the sacrificial ceremony that was intended to shield the region from additional otherworldly taint. Yet the hex nevertheless afflicted the Lambton dynasty, because John's spirit shattered with the demise of his father. A shattered heart lacks the spiritual fortitude required to fend off paranormal vengeance. Across 9 generations, each ruler of Lamp encountered a brutal demise. They perished in combat, through murder, via mishaps during the hunt, or by taking their own lives when the burden of the ancestral hex grew insupportable. The tale of the Lambton dragon has endured for 600 years, serving not just as amusement, but as a caution regarding the repercussions of the profanation of holy objects and the presumption of human dominion over incomprehensible forces. The serpent embodies the return of suppressed truths, ancient energies that technological society attempts to deny but can never fully obliterate. Contemporary travelers to County Durham can observe vestiges of the worm's presence. The well where John initially deposited his capture remains intact, now obstructed with stone and consecrated by successive generations of clergy. Penshaw Hill exhibits impressions that local geologists cannot attribute to natural forces, yet correspond precisely to the worm's body marks described in the tale. The river, even after centuries of flowing, retains areas of bizarre discoloration where the creature's blood once tainted the holy waters. Ecological experts analyzing the vicinity have recorded strange phenomena consistent with the myth's description. Dirt samples from Penner Hill contain mineral concentrations that are geologically impossible for that locale. The fish in the river exhibit genetic irregularities, hinting at ancestral exposure to unknown mutagens. Subterranean water sources near Lambton Castle hold microscopic substances that cannot be linked to any recognized rock formations. The story's psychological effect extends past academic curiosity into modern environmental awareness. The lantern worm functions as an ideal analogy for ecological ruin, a minor, seemingly trivial infringement of nature's order that escalates into a catastrophe, endangering entire biomes. John's angling trip epitomizes all instances of environmental negligence. His offhand disposal of a supernatural creature mirrors each example of improper refuse management, and the resulting beast transforms into global warming, contamination, or any of the ecological emergencies currently menacing world civilization. The malediction on the lamp lineage illustrates how environmental harm creates persistent effects that impact coming generations. In the same way, each lamp ruler atoned for his forebears' pride. Every human generation inherits the ecological liabilities accrued by those before them. The worm's capability to regenerate parallels how environmental issues often intensify when faced with half-hearted measures. What is necessary are holistic strategies that tackle underlying causes instead of superficial signs. Modern reports of supernatural events in the region often follow the pattern set by the original tale. Trekkers on Penor Hill describe witnessing enormous snake-like shapes shifting through the dawn fog, but these vanish when one gets close. Fishermen along the river occasionally reel in fish with odd features, extra fins, abnormal colors, or eyes that seem to harbor malevolent consciousness. But those catches inexplicably vanish once taken indoors. The well behind Lambton Castle, although sealed for ages, sometimes emits noises that residents claim resemble something massive, stirring far beneath the earth. Seismic instruments placed there by curious investigators have detected rhythmic pulsations that do not match any known geological activity, yet align exactly with the respiration cycle of an enormous reptile. These current phenomena indicate that the lantern worm's defeat was not complete. It was merely reduced to a slumbering condition. Regional myth insists the beast will reappear once ecological devastation hits a tipping point, arising from its subterranean den to exact retribution for mankind's persistent exploitation of nature. This myth serves as a reminder that our deeds yield repercussions that far outstrip our capacity to foresee or manage. John Lambton's instant of thoughtless sacrilege spawned a monster that plagued an entire area for 7 years. Supernatural forces were needed to vanquish it, and a curse remained that afflicted his lineage for 9 generations. In our present era of worldwide ecological crisis, the narrative functions as both a caution and a lesson. A caution about how issues expand exponentially from seemingly small breaches of nature's order, and instruction regarding the cost required to re-establish equilibrium once that order has been violated. Tonight, as you reflect on your own connection to the planet's sacred waters, bear in mind that every stream retains memory of what has been cast into its depths. Each well contains more than mere water. It also holds the gathered purposes of everyone who has ever taken from its source. Deep under Penshaw Hill, lying in wait within the enduring darkness, an ancient entity bides its time for the moment when the hour of judgment returns. The lantern worm is more than a mere creature from history. It embodies a timeless truth. Unchecked power inevitably leads to ruin, Hubris towards the natural world brings about repercussions that may devour all that we hold dear. The seeress Mother Shipton hailed from Canesborough, within Yorkshire's limestone caverns, where the river Nid cuts through rock predating human recollection. A child was brought into the world. Her presence alone questioned every notion about the line between ordinary and otherworldly forces. Mother Shipton, the most renowned oracle of England, foresaw impending disasters with such precision that her name turned into a byword for calamity. However, concealed beneath the tale of the sage who perceived across centuries is a more sinister reality. It is the account of a being whose arrival heralded an era where old sorcery clashed with rising logic. Imagine Nesbur in the year 1488, a settlement atop limestone precipices, where merchants and pilgrims would stop to gaze in awe at the petrifying well. This natural marvel converted living material into rock via enigmatic mineral reactions. Within a cavern that villagers murmured predated the Christian faith, dwelled Agatha South. Her loveliness was rivaled solely by her notoriety for communing with forces that proper folk. Shunned by many, the events surrounding Ursula South's entry into the world were so aberrant that they cemented her mythical reputation even prior to her first inhalation. As the midwife recounted, Agatha's contractions started amidst a tempest so fierce it appeared to rattle the planet's core. Thunderbolts hit the same location over and over, etching arcane markings into the earth encircling the cavern. When the infant appeared, onlookers noted an abrupt chill so intense that water inside containers turned to ice. Nevertheless, the atmosphere became heavy with a brimstone smell, as though the underworld had gaped wide to welcome the baby. Yet the most disturbing element of Ursula's arrival was her physical form. The child exhibited bodily malformations so extreme that they implied otherworldly origins over natural ones. Her spine was heavily curved, her arms and legs contorted at bizarre positions, and her countenance bore traits resembling a reptile. The most disquieting aspect was her gaze, which those daring enough to meet described as immeasurably old, containing wisdom beyond what any newborn ought to have. Margaret Steele, the attendant, recorded these paranormal events in a diary that remained intact up to the massive conflagration at Canesborough in 1658. She penned, "Ursula, the infant, entered existence stamped by powers incomprehensible to humanity. Despite her recent birth, she looked at us with orbs carrying the burden of ages. Her cries resonated through the cave-like utterances from a different realm, and each flame in the room flickered as if extinguished by a cursed gust. Starting in infancy, Ursula exhibited talents, setting her apart from normal human existence. At just 3 months old, she uttered her initial phrases, not in the incoherent cooing typical of babies, but in full statements foreseeing happenings that would not take place for many months or even years. Mothers from the vicinity carried their ailing offspring to the cavern because the odd baby's caress could cure maladies that stumped the most accomplished doctors. Yet mending was only a single facet of Ursula's paranormal abilities. With maturity, her power to glimpse coming occurrences evolved into near omniscience. Gazing across temporal dimensions came as naturally to her as peering through glass. She watched conflicts that would erupt many years later. She observed innovations that would not be created for hundreds of years. She perceived calamities concealed in the far-off tomorrow of humankind. When she turned 7, Ursula proclaimed her initial significant foresight, employing rhyming pairs that would later be her customary style. In front of an assembly of local aristocrats who arrived to put her claimed abilities to the test, she foretold the demise of King Richard III on Bosworth Field. That event was still 3 years in the future, something no logical mind could have foreseen. She outlined the Tudor rose destined to supplant the Plantagenet crown, identifying Henry Tudor as the coming monarch. She cautioned about religious conflicts that would rip England asunder in the next 100 years, and the correctness of these foretellings cemented Ursula's fame across the north of England. Travelers from all over the kingdom came to consult her, bearing gifts of precious metals that she consistently declined. Solely humble offerings of sustenance or garments for the needy were taken by her. She took up residence in the grotto near the stone-turning spring, harnessing its mystical traits to stage proofs that persuaded doubters of her bond to the beyond. Nevertheless, the prophecies of Mother Shipton seldom brought solace. Her expertise lay in foreseeing calamities, wars, and sweeping transformations that would morph the recognizable world into something strange and horrifying. What she envisioned of times to come depicted humankind propelled by powers outside their command toward fates, foretelling anguish instead of triumph. Her most renowned prophecy involved Cardinal Wolsey, the mighty chancellor of Henry VIII, who appeared to be at the zenith of his authority when Shipton made her statement. During 1530, as Wolsey journeyed north toward York to assume his role as archbishop, regional lords set up a meeting with the seeress. Her renown had spread as far as the king's own palace. Wolsey came into the meeting with the self-assurance of someone whose authority was matched only by the monarch's. Yet Mother Shipton, then in her 40s and showing the bodily scars from years of conducting otherworldly energies, gazed upon the cardinal. Her stare appeared to bore straight into his being. "Your grace journeys northward to claim a position you will glimpse, yet never hold." In the melodic cadence characteristic of her prophecies, she chanted, "The ground shall part to accept you before your foot steps inside your own cathedral." Wolsey, used to praise from attendants and respect from the populace, reacted with fury instead of heed. He vowed to see the prophetess executed as a sorceress, should her forecast be untrue, then resumed his northern travel with renewed resolve to show she was mistaken. Yet Mother Shipton's vision was accurate. Wolsey perished at Leicester Abbey en route to York, never arriving at the cathedral meant for his installation. His remains were interred hurriedly in a nameless grave, confirming her prophecy that the soil would take him prior to his claiming the promised post. That triumph boosted Mother Shipton's fame for precision, yet it also revealed the dreadful weight of her ability. She had the capacity to see what lay ahead with absolute lucidity, yet lacked any means to avert them. Her predictions functioned as cautions that were habitually disregarded by the very individuals who ought to have paid attention. This generated a sorrowful loop in which knowing the future caused irritation instead of enablement. The mental strain of perpetually observing upcoming catastrophes reshaped Mother Shipton from the fairly ordinary girl she once was. She morphed into an entity progressively detached from typical mortal existence. Those who came to her cavern spoke of a vibe of ethereal disconnection, as though the seeress dwelled concurrently across several eras and struggled to fix her attention on the now. Her predictions from that time unveiled happenings still centuries off, showing a paranormal insight beyond any chance of logical reasoning. She prophesied the massive London fire in 1666, detailing inferno that would devour the old city and leave it changed. She anticipated the internal strife that would split England in the 1600s. She singled out Charles I as a monarch destined to be beheaded for elevating his own rule over holy precept. Most astonishingly, Mother Shipton's foresights reached into current times with precision that still amazes scholars today. She foresaw the creation of metal vessels that would travel without breeze, vehicles that would operate without animals. Furthermore, she predicted aircraft that would transport humans across the heavens. Her remarkably precise visions of worldwide communication networks eerily foreshadowed both the telephone and the internet. She also foretold that iron would one day float upon water as easily as a wooden boat. She declared that gold would be unearthed in lands yet unknown. These verses correctly predicted the advent of iron-hulled ships and the discovery of gold in America and Australia continents that European maps had never charted during her lifetime. What may be most unsettling are her prophecies concerning environmental upheaval. She spoke of catastrophe and global warfare. She envisioned conflicts spanning entire continents. She described weapons capable of leveling cities in moments and ecological shifts that would render vast regions of the Earth unfit for habitation. Her future visions suggested that humanity's technological progress would create perils far greater than anything medieval society faced. The remarkable accuracy of Mother Shipton's long-range predictions forces us to question the very nature of time and consciousness. She either possessed a genuine supernatural ability to foresee events or had access to sources of information that conventional history cannot explain. The extraordinary specificity of her prophecies, combined with their consistent reliability over centuries, makes simple speculation or coincidence statistically impossible. Modern researchers analyzing Mother Shipton's predictions have identified patterns that suggest she had what might be called a temporal overview, the capacity to perceive human history as a completed narrative rather than an unfolding sequence. Such a perspective would account for both the precision of her specific forecasts and the generally gloomy tone of her visions. After all, an observer viewing history from outside the flow of time would see the full accumulation of human suffering. Instead of experiencing the hope that sustains those living within time's current, the cave where Mother Shipton dwelled and delivered her prophecies has become a site of enduring paranormal activity. Visitors report episodes of temporal displacement, witnessing scenes from different historical eras overlapping in the same physical space. The petrifying well continues to function according to principles that modern geology cannot fully explain. It transforms organic material into stone through processes that seem to accelerate natural mineralization by thousands of years. Recent investigations using electromagnetic sensing equipment have detected unusual energy patterns in the cave that correspond to documented instances of prophetic activity. These readings suggest the presence of some form of temporal distortion. This could account for both Mother Shipton's abilities and the ongoing supernatural phenomena reported by contemporary visitors. The environmental implications of Mother Shipton's prophecies have taken on new urgency as her predictions about climate change and ecological collapse prove increasingly accurate. Her warnings about seas of glass and lands that sink beneath the waves now read like descriptions of rising sea levels and coastal flooding. Her visions of burning air and water turned to stone suggest environmental contamination on a scale that 16th century society could not have imagined. The psychological impact of studying Mother Shipton's prophecies extends beyond historical curiosity into existential questions about human agency and free will. If future events can be perceived with the accuracy demonstrated by her predictions, what does that imply about our ability to change or avoid negative outcomes? Her own experience suggests that foreknowledge creates responsibility without granting power the terrible burden of seeing disasters approach while being powerless to stop them. Contemporary reports of prophetic experiences in the Nidderdale area often follow patterns established by Mother Shipton's original manifestations. Visitors to the cave occasionally experience spontaneous visions of future events, though these are typically brief and fragmentary compared to the sustained supernatural awareness that characterized the original prophetess. Some researchers propose that the cave itself retains a form of temporal permeability that can temporarily expand human consciousness beyond its normal limits. The legend of Mother Shipton serves as both a historical curiosity and a contemporary warning. Her prophecies remind us that the future is not a blank slate waiting to be written, but a destination we are approaching through decisions made in the present. Her visions of technological advancement, coupled with environmental destruction and social upheaval, offer a roadmap of possibilities that current events seem determined to fulfill. The accuracy of her predictions also raises disturbing questions about the nature of human progress. If a 16th century prophetess could foresee the major developments of the next 5 centuries, including their negative consequences, what does that suggest about humanity's ability to learn from experience and choose wiser paths? The prophecies she delivered suggest a course of advancement that appears nearly unavoidable. It is as though human societies adhere to paths that can be discerned by otherworldly senses, despite being concealed from everyday consciousness. Contemporary environmental advocates and cultural commentators frequently reference Mother Shipton's predictions regarding the fallout of unrestrained technological progress and ecological degradation. Her cautions about the cost of viewing nature as a resource instead of a holy responsibility echo present-day anxieties over global warming, contamination, and the decline of biological variety. Within this framework, she acts not merely as a person of history, but as a messenger from bygone times, cautioning about tomorrows that today's decisions are rendering more probable. This evening, as you reflect on the path of human society and your own role amid historical currents that surpass personal influence, recall that the cavern of Mother Shipton continues to reverberate with glimpses of what might come to pass. The well that turns objects to stone persists in its enigmatic function, converting living material into rock, serving as a lesson that certain transformations, once initiated, are irreversible. In the chalky depths wherein the seer once resided, the days to come still project their silhouette across the ages. It awaits those capable of perceiving and possessing the insight to recognize that soothsaying is not amusement, but admonition, not idle intrigue, but a summons. Awareness of the decisions that mold the world of tomorrow. Wayland the Smith. The wrathful artisan of the white horse upon the blustery heights of Berkshire, where age-old chalk carvings etched into slopes recount tales of tribes whose identities have been erased by time. This relic predates every English cathedral. The workshop of Wayland, an ancient burial mound from the Neolithic era older than Stonehenge, indicates the mythical smithy of a deity. His godly artistry was rivaled solely by his ability to exact dreadful retribution. Residing here is Wayland the Smith, lord over metal and flame. His otherworldly talents could produce marvels, surpassing mortal fancy or devices of ruin capable of toppling entire realms. Envision the Berkshire Downs as they appeared 5 millennia past, when the white slopes of chalk extended continuously to all horizons. The Uffington White Horse had already kept vigil over this hallowed terrain for countless centuries. At this spot where energy lines meet and the ground retains recollection of ceremonies performed during humanity's infancy, the deities still strode freely among men, and the barrier separating celestial from earthly domains stayed thin for those acquainted with the correct incantations. In myth, Wayland emerges as an entity of inconceivable paradoxes, a celestial metalworker able to forge objects with the power to alter existence itself. Still, he was constrained by mystical rules that rendered him a servant to any human shrewd enough to manipulate his universal duties. He had the physical. The flawless nature of a deity merged with the emotional frailties of humanity, producing a creature whose immense might ceaselessly battled with intense yearnings that might result in disastrous retribution. The smith's furnace, embedded within the prehistoric tomb that continues to carry his name, functioned based on rules surpassing conventional metalworking. In this place, Wayland was able to shape substances that existed solely in the domain of theoretical potential, forging blades capable of slicing any substance, protective gear that could deflect any strike, and items endowed with paranormal qualities that granted their wielders transient divine powers. However, Wayland's most supreme achievements were not armaments or shields, but rather artistic pieces of such breathtaking beauty that they undermined the very fundamentals of existence. Ornaments that imprisoned rays of starlight in tangible shape, instruments whose tunes could mend human injuries or propel audiences into sacred frenzy, and automated beings that harbored awareness nearly identical to actual sentience. These masterpieces showed that genuine artistry functions not only on the physical plane but also on the metaphysical realm, where aesthetic splendor turns into a power able to reshape awareness. The tale that cemented Wayland's fame for otherworldly retribution. A human monarch whose avarice eclipsed his prudence upon hearing of the celestial blacksmith's presence, motivated by a craving for relics that could elevate him to the mightiest sovereign in the entire known realm, Nedard. He concocted a scheme to seize Wayland and compel him to labor solely for the Swedish monarchy. Royal troops attacked while Wayland slumbered, securing him with shackles made from iron of meteor origin and consecrated by clerics of the ancient faith. These chains could withstand supernatural force, yet they were no match for supernatural guile. Wayland permitted his own capture, all the while plotting a vengeance that would unveil the dire consequences of reducing divine entities to mortal servitude. Nidhad conveyed his captive to a forge on an isolated island, a place from which no escape could be conceived. There he forced Wayland to toil, fashioning treasures for the crown. For many months, the smith labored with feigned obedience, forging crowns set with gems that imprisoned the light of day, and blades that never lost their sharpness. He also crafted golden adornments of such breathtaking elegance they appeared to ring with heavenly harmonies. Yet amidst these royal orders, the divine artisan was secretly assembling tools of retribution. Employing substances undetectable by human senses, he shaped tools that coexisted partly beyond ordinary space-time. These relics possessed the power to warp reality itself, far beyond mere cutting or molding of physical substance. Every finished artifact moved him nearer to the hour when he would demand payment for Nidhad's hubris interest that would reverberate across ages. The chance for vengeance materialized when Nidhad's 2 sons, Princes Slagfitter and Agil, arrived at the island forge to place personal commissions. Arms Wayland greeted them with feigned modesty, promising to forge each prince a sword, rendering him unbeatable in combat. He demanded only that they come back alone the next day to collect the finished blades, since the final incantations demanded solitude to be finished. And so it came to pass. When the princes came for their meeting, Wayland stood prepared with retribution, designed to illustrate the gulf between human brutality and celestial righteousness. With instruments crafted from otherworldly metals, he dispatched both youths with such exacting execution that their spirits were detached from their physical bodies, while preserving their outward appearance intact. He then turned their remains into the substance for objects that would stand as undying memorials to the cost of subjugating deities. Using Slagfitter's cranium, Wayland fashioned a goblet with a silver surface etched with designs recounting the tale of the prince's demise with such vivid accuracy that any observer scrutinizing it could experience the killing firsthand, as though they were there. From eagle's bones, he created a musical device whose haunting strains could induce either madness or pure bliss, depending on the smith's design. The most horrific act, he removed their eyes and turned them into jewels, so magnificent they appeared to contain the radiance of faraway stars. Yet, on closer inspection, one discovered the glow originated from the imprisoned spirits of their original possessors. Upon King Nidhad's arrival to fetch his sons, Wayland offered these objects as presents to commemorate the royal visit. The monarch had no idea he was sipping from his own son's cranium, while hearing tunes produced from another son's skeleton. The king commended the craftsman's skill, unwittingly taking part in an occult ceremony that would tether him to the repercussions of his initial transgression. But Wayland's crowning act of retribution remained ahead. Berdilda, Nidhad's daughter, had made frequent trips to the forge to observe the celestial worker at his craft. Captivated by skills beyond anything she had seen in the human realm, Wayland perceived both her purity and her capacity to serve as a tool of retribution. He forged for her a ring of such sublime loveliness it appeared to embody the very soul of flawless love. The moment Berdilda slipped the ring onto her finger, she was united with Wayland by pre-human mystical statutes. Their pairing, solemnized by celestial rites instead of earthly traditions, resulted in an offspring destined to bear traits both mortal and divine. Vidgar matured into the foremost champion of his age, all the while standing as a breathing testament to the fallout of his grandfather's wrongdoings. Having fulfilled his vengeance and reclaimed his celestial dignity, Wayland disclosed the actual substance of his presence to the appalled monarch. Nidhad discovered he had been quaffing from his son's cranium, hearing tunes composed from his other son's remains, and that his own daughter now bore the offspring of the deity he had dared to subjugate. Yet the most dreadful disclosure was that these deeds of retribution were not arbitrary malice, but universal equilibrium. This illustrated the inescapable outcomes of regarding celestial entities as assets to possess and exploit. Wayland's flight from the island smithy proved the pointlessness of human efforts to confine divine authority. Employing wings assembled from otherworldly substances and his own holy being, he soared into the heavens. He uttered a malediction that would haunt Nidhad's lineage across 7 successive generations. Each heir would bear the imprint of the monarch's initial sin. They would endure losses and catastrophes, acting as perpetual warnings that certain thresholds should never be trespassed. The tale of Wayland's vengeance circulated across northern Europe, functioning as both amusement and caution regarding the perils of manipulating paranormal powers. Yet the profound wisdom embedded in the narrative exposes tenets of universal fairness that stay pertinent, irrespective of technological progress or societal evolution. Wayland embodies the quintessential artist, one whose creative force is intrinsically linked to personal liberty. His masterpieces arise from volition, not coercion. The otherworldly skill ascribed to Wayland mirrors an age-old belief that creation is a spiritual act, not just a physical one. Within traditional societies, smiths held great reverence, as their capacity to convert raw elements into functional items was regarded as sharing in divine creative energy. The forge evolved into a hallowed domain where both material and spiritual metamorphosis happened in unison. The smith's mind molded reality, just as the hammer and anvil forged the metal. Having exacted his vengeance and reclaimed his divine dignity, Wayland unveiled the genuine character of his offerings to the aghast monarch. Nidhad discovered that he had been consuming wine from his own son's cranium and enjoying melodies produced from the remains of his other son. Nidhad also realized that his daughter was now pregnant with the offspring of the deity he had dared to enslave. Yet the most horrifying truth was that these retributions were not arbitrary savagery but rather universal justice. This illustrates the unavoidable outcomes of regarding celestial entities as possessions for exploitation. Wayland's flight from the island workshop showed the fruitlessness of human efforts to confine supernatural force. Employing wings fashioned from ethereal substances and his own godly substance, he ascended heavenward, simultaneously uttering a hex that would haunt Nithid's lineage across 7 lifetimes. Each progeny would bear the stain of the sovereign's initial transgression, enduring setbacks and calamities as perpetual warnings that certain limits are never to be violated. The tale of Wayland's retaliation diffused across northern Europe, functioning as both amusement and caution about the repercussions of misusing occult powers. However, the underlying message embedded within the narrative unveils maxims of universal fairness that stay pertinent, unchanged. Neither technological progress nor cultural transformation alters it. Wayland stands as the prototype of the creator whose inventiveness is inseparable from self-determination, with his finest creations springing from liberty, not pressure. The otherworldly artistry connected to Wayland embodies an archaic comprehension of making as a spiritual, not just corporeal endeavor. In ancestral societies, blacksmiths commanded profound veneration. Their knack for converting crude substances into practical items was perceived as a partaking in holy creative might. The smithy turned into a consecrated zone where concurrent corporeal and spiritual change took place. The smith's awareness influenced the world just as decisively as the hammer and anvil formed the metal. Excavated proof indicates that the location called Wayland's Smithy was truly linked to metallurgical endeavors lasting millennia. Digs have revealed indications of ceremonial placement of metal objects, implying that the spot functioned as a holy grounds. Otherworldly powers were summoned to elevate human artistry. The Neolithic tomb chamber constituting the structure's center was built with celestial alignments, showcasing advanced knowledge of stellar motion. This hints at links between terrestrial workmanship and universal harmony. Contemporary visitors to Wayland's Forge frequently recount episodes that mirror the mythical stories of otherworldly skill. Artisans and metalworkers mention experiencing motivation to undertake tasks, surpassing their ordinary capabilities when near the old landmark. Others tell of discovering strange substances, metals with attributes defying standard metallurgy, or instruments that appear to function with unnatural effectiveness for certain uses. The mental effect of confronting Wayland's myth goes past mere historical intrigue, touching on issues of the bond between imagination and independence. The narrative implies that genuine creative articulation is inseparable from individual liberty. Masterpieces arise from inspiration, not duress. This concept holds true not only for conventional arts, but for any inventive attempt where outside coercion endangers artistic wholeness. Modern ecological and societal campaigns regularly cite Wayland's case when debating the outcomes of viewing natural assets or human work as commodities to be exploited, instead of holy responsibilities to be respected. His retaliation against Nithid stands a metaphor for the unavoidable results of structures that put immediate profits above enduring viability systems that consider creative individuals as mere generators, rather than acknowledging their intrinsic worth and freedom. The myth additionally functions as a caution regarding the concealed prices of otherworldly aid. The blessings Wan bestows upon those who respectfully approach him bring profound change, yet his retribution against those who try to take advantage shows that divine authority follows moral codes. No clever deal or brute strength can bypass. When the king tried to force a god into servitude, the repercussions rippled through every generation of his family. This implies that certain transgressions generate karmic obligations reaching well beyond the initial offender. Today, neo-pagan followers frequently journey to Wan's Forge to find inspiration for their artistic endeavors or to deepen their spiritual ties to ancient crafts. These modern visitations often mirror the rituals described in age-old myths. Gifts deposited at the location vanish without explanation. Strange objects emerge in surrounding areas, and artisans claim they gain heightened skills for tasks they start after coming there. Wan's blessings still appear, taking forms suited to modern tech and societal frameworks. Programmers contributing to open-source software occasionally encounter profound revelations following a trip to the old smithy. Creators facing artistic stagnation describe unexpectedly overcoming obstacles once thought unbeatable. Musicians recount catching tunes carried by breezes over the downs, with pieces appearing to arise directly from the terrain instead of from human creativity. These modern signs suggest that the truths behind Juan's story are still alive in today's world. The divine smith stands for the primordial creative energy that works outside human dominion, yet accessible through rightful homage and insight. His workshop becomes a metaphor for any place where physical and spiritual change happen at once, where thought shapes reality as much as skill shapes materials. The malevolent dimension of Juan's tale also appears in modern settings, specifically when creators are taken advantage of or restricted by structures valuing profit above artistic honesty. Companies that view workers as disposable assets and schools that suppress rather than encourage artistic growth all risk provoking reactions. Societal frameworks that inhibit genuine self-expression similarly risk provoking reactions akin to Juan's divine punishment. These arise not from literal sorcery, but from the natural fallout of systems that breach core tenets of creative freedom. This evening, as you reflect on your own connection to creative force and the influences that enable or hinder genuine expression, recall that Juan's forge continues to blaze in hallowed realms of change. The old forge remains a testament that certain kinds of power cannot be possessed or managed. They can only be revered and acknowledged. Whether your medium is metal, language, digital art, or paint, the holy blacksmith's legacy shows that the finest works come from liberty, not force, from inspiration, not exploitation. Hear the sound of hammer striking anvil resound throughout the downs. Sense the warmth emanating from forges, ageless and everlasting. And keep in mind that there, on the Berkshire Hills, where white horses gallop over eternal meadows, Wayland persists in his labor, forging items residing at the crossroads of material and spiritual realms, imparting the tough truth that artistry is inseparable from awareness. True art arises solely when the creator stays at liberty to respect both their insight and moral compass. Merlin the Enchanter, Britain's final sorcerer. From the fog-covered mountains of Wales to the megaliths of Cornwall, spanning terrains where age-old enchantment still thrums under the surface of Christian culture, resonates the most intricate and paradoxical character in Britain's folklore. Merlin the Magician, Camelot's sorcerer, counselor to royalty, seer of England's fate, but also an entity much more sinister and menacing than tales of chivalry imply. Beneath the well-known narratives of Arthur's teacher hides the chronicle of a creature trapped between two realms, functioning as a bridge, linking the fading epoch of sorcery and the emerging era of human desire. Observing the unavoidable decay of every principle he tried to safeguard. Imagine 6th century Britain after the Roman armies had departed. Yet those very roads still guided travelers through woodlands where far older forces than anything Caesar had ever ruled held sway. In such a setting, suspended between classical antiquity's fading light and medieval darkness, the final guardians of ancient wisdom fought desperately to safeguard knowledge that Christianity aimed to either assimilate or eradicate. It was into this turbulent world of transition and conflict that Merlin made his appearance. According to the deepest traditions, he was not born but manifested as the offspring of a mortal woman and an otherworldly intelligence. This origin defined him as a being belonging fully to neither the human nor the supernatural realm. His mother, Carathan of Deephead, was famed across Wales for her beauty and her unyielding refusal to accept the Christian faith, despite royal pressure to abandon the old ways. Her pregnancy occurred without any mortal father, conceived during ritual communion with forces that predated human civilization by eons. The child from this supernatural union bore little resemblance to ordinary mortals. From birth, Merlin had the appearance of extreme old age, with eyes holding knowledge accumulated across geological rather than human timespans. His first words were not infant babble, but complete sentences prophesying events centuries ahead. His voice carried harmonics resonating at frequencies beyond normal human hearing. But perhaps most unsettling was Merlin's emotional detachment from human affairs. Unlike other supernatural beings, displaying exaggerated mortal passions, the young wizard appeared to exist in a state of cosmic perspective, where individual human lives seemed as brief as mayflies. This detachment would become both his greatest strength and ultimate tragedy, allowing him to manipulate events across centuries while preventing emotional connections that might have anchored him to humanity. Merlin's education occurred not in any earthly institution, but through direct communion with intelligences beyond the physical plane. Britain's stone circles served as his classrooms, where prehistoric alignments focused cosmic energies to expand consciousness beyond mortal limits. There, he learned to perceive time as a navigable dimension rather than something merely endured. He developed prophetic abilities that made him indispensable to rulers seeking to understand their destinies. His mastery of magic transcended mere spellcasting to encompass fundamental manipulation of reality's operating principles. Merlin commanded the elements not through supernatural coercion, but through understanding the mathematical relationships governing natural phenomena. His illusions were not deceptions, but temporary alterations of physical law, making impossible things briefly possible. Most impressively, he could perceive the quantum probability streams that determined future events. This allowed him to guide reality toward desired outcomes through subtle interventions at crucial decision points. The wizard's first recorded appearance in history occurred during the reign of Vortigern, the British king. His alliance with Saxon mercenaries threatened to fragment post-Roman Britain into competing tribal territories. Vortigern had attempted to build a fortress on Mount Snowdon, but each night the structure mysteriously collapsed, despite his builder's skill. Court magicians suggested the foundation required sacrifice of a child born without a mortal father, leading to Merlin's capture and intended execution. But when brought before the king, Merlin demonstrated powers far beyond what Vortigern's advisors had imagined. Instead of pleading for his life, the young wizard revealed the true cause of the fortress's instability. An underground lake where two dragons, one red, one white, fought an eternal battle for dominion over Britain's future. Through supernatural perception, he guided the king's workers to uncover this hidden conflict. This proved his prophetic abilities while delivering his first famous predictions about Saxon conquest and eventual native British resurgence. The dragons themselves were not mere beasts, but embodiments of competing historical forces. The red dragon represented the Celtic people's connection to the land's ancient powers. The white dragon symbolized the Saxon invaders' pragmatic materialism. Their underground battle mirrored the cosmic struggle between magical and rational worldviews that would define Britain's transition from prehistoric to medieval civilization. Merlin's partnership with Arthur marked both the zenith of his worldly power and the onset of his profound disenchantment with humanity. He orchestrated Arthur's birth by employing sorcery to manipulate events. This allowed Uther Pendragon to take on the guise of Duke Gorwa, guaranteeing that the coming sovereign would inherit both noble lineage and otherworldly ancestry. By doing so, Merlin broke his customary rule of non-interference, initiating his outright involvement in political affairs. This would eventually taint his universal viewpoint. The magician's guidance of Arthur represented his effort to forge a monarch capable of uniting old knowledge with pragmatic rule. He conceived Camelot not simply as a regal seat, but as an enchanted workshop where timeless wisdom could be safeguarded while accommodating the demands of Christian society. The Round Table functioned through laws of holy geometry that channeled mystic forces toward upholding fairness and unity across Arthur's kingdom. Yet, the wizard's most magnificent achievement was likewise his riskiest endeavor. Excalibur, the blade he forged for Arthur, was far more than an ordinary armed tool. It was a relic that bonded its wielder to the primal energies that governed monarchy itself. The sword could cut through any substance because it was forged from solidified intention, rather than from common earth metal. Its sheath conferred invulnerability by existing partly beyond conventional space-time. Combined, they rendered Arthur nearly godlike in authority while binding him to universal duties no mortal could fully grasp. The mental burden of wielding such might slowly degrade Arthur and his knights, despite Merlin's thorough instruction in the sacred disciplines required to responsibly manage supernatural power. The sorcerer watched in growing horror as once idealistic champions became obsessed with their own reputations. High-minded quests devolved into contests for personal glory, and the Round Table's fellowship fractured into factions, pursuing conflicting interpretations of honor. The most devastating was Arthur's bond with Guinevere, his marriage to the king. Embodied Merlin's attempt to ground royal power in human affection, rather than theoretical concepts. The wizard had foreseen that Arthur's supernatural lineage would eventually isolate him from ordinary human bonds, unless counterbalanced by authentic emotional closeness. But he never predicted that the queen's own humanity would render her vulnerable to desires conflicting with her regal duties, giving rise to the romantic triangle with Lancelot that would ultimately shatter Camelot's unity. Merlin's prophetic sight allowed him to perceive the impending catastrophe with absolute clarity, yet his cosmic perspective prevented him from feeling appropriate urgency about averting it. To his expanded awareness, Arthur's reign was merely a brief episode in Britain's endless cycle of ascension and decline. The wizard could foresee golden eras emerging centuries after Camelot's fall. He could behold technological wonders that would dwarf Arthur's accomplishments, and spiritual evolutions that would make the Round Table's idealism seem primitive by contrast. This temporal detachment created a fatal flaw in Merlin's character. He became so absorbed in long-term patterns that he lost sight of the immediate human costs of historical change. His manipulation of events served abstract principles rather than protecting the individual lives that gave those principles meaning. The sorcerer, who could reshape reality with a mere thought, gradually lost the emotional investment needed to care whether his intervention succeeded or failed. The outward manifestation of this spiritual crisis was Merlin's relationship with Nimue, the enchantress, who would become both his greatest student and his ultimate destroyer. She represented everything he had sacrificed in pursuit of cosmic wisdom: passion, spontaneity, connection to immediate experience, rather than eternal patterns. What began as a teacher-student mentorship evolved into something approaching mutual destruction as each sought to possess what the other embodied. Nimue's hunger for magical knowledge matched Merlin's need for an emotional anchor to human experience. She offered him the physical and spiritual intimacy he had abandoned while chasing transcendent wisdom. While he granted her access to powers that could reshape reality to her desires, but their union was doomed by fundamental incompatibility. She existed fully within time, while he had learned to perceive existence from outside temporal sequence. The famous tale of Merlin's imprisonment in the crystal cave does not simply reflect betrayal. 双方都意识到，这段关系在灵性层面上对彼此已变得有害。尼缪利用巫师自身的魔法学时，创造出一种束缚，既能压制他的力量，又维持了他的意识。这实际上构建了一座超自然的图书馆，人们可获取他积累的智慧，而无需再承受因他与世隔绝带来的风险。但梅林被囚禁的深层真相表明，这是自愿隐退，而非被迫监禁。巫师早已厌倦目睹自己的干预带来苦难，尽管他初衷善良，每次试图引导人类走向更高境界，似乎都引发不可预料的后果，造成的伤害远超他试图解决的难题。他退入水晶洞穴，象征着认识到宇宙智慧与政治摄入根本不可调和。在这座水晶牢狱般的圣所中，梅林继续以微妙的方式影响着不列颠的历史。那些干预既尊重人类自由意志，又防止了彻底灾难。他的意识同时存在于所有时代，使他能跨越世纪协调事件，服务于凡人无法理解的复杂模式。这位曾效忠于个别国王的巫师，如今服务于不列颠本身的永恒法则。他守护着这座岛屿的桥梁角色，连接古老智慧与未来可能。梅林传说的心理影响远超历史好奇，触及当代关于知识、智慧、权力、责任的关系。他的故事警示，智力发展若缺乏相应的情感与灵性成长，将带来危险。巫师通过抛弃人类局限获得的宇宙视角，最终却使他与他试图服务的人类隔离开来。现代与梅林影响的接触常发生在域线空间，那里古代与现实交织。研究史前遗迹的学者报告了意识扩展的经历，瞬间洞悉复杂问题。前沿物理学家偶尔描述突破时刻， 似乎有外部来源直接传输知识。艺术家和作家在创作困境中，有时经历一段超自然灵感期，随后创作出超越其正常能力的作品。这些当代迹象表明，梅林的意识仍按原始传说原则运作。他的影响力在个人、文化或技术转型时刻最强。此时，个体或社会正面临决定未来走向的十字路口。巫师的干预表现为突发洞见、同步事件或技术突破，既服务人类长期发展，又尊重真实成长所需的自主性。梅林传说的环境寓意如今更具现实意义，因为它关于切断与自然联系之后果的警告正愈发有预见性。他的魔法源于理解人类在宇宙秩序中的位置，而非企图通过技术操控支配自然法则。卡美洛的崩溃象征了，当文明优先考虑短期控制而忽视与支撑生命的自然系统长期和谐时，将会发生什么？透过梅林的预见意识来看，气候变化不仅是环境危机，更是灵性紧急状态，表明人类与支配地球健康的宇宙原则根本脱节。巫师退出直接干预，反映了这样的认知。单凭技术方案无法解决根植于意识的问题，真正的可持续性需要灵性转变，而非仅仅是工程改良。梅林教学方法的传说为当代教育与发展路径提供了指引。他的教学法强调体验式学习，而非抽象灌输，与自然力量直接交流，而非课堂理论，培养智慧，而非单纯积累讯息。巫师明白，真正的知识源于智力、理解、情感成熟与灵性洞见的融合。现代治疗与教育领域的从业者常在处理智力发展超前于情感或灵性成长的人时，引用梅林的范例。他的故事提供了一个理解过早父权危险的框架。个体在获得知识或权威时，尚未培养出明智运用这种力量所需的品格。梅林所在的水晶洞穴，象征着一种超越正常时间限制，但仍与人类关切相连的意识状态。冥想大师、远见艺术家和创新科学家有时能达到类似状态，个人意识扩展至涵盖通常对普通意识不可见的模式。这些体验为意识提供了梅林永久获取的宇宙视角的一瞥，尽管通常没有它最终转变时的那种情感孤立。当代亚瑟王爱好者常试图找到梅林的物理囚禁之处，探索全英各地可能与传说描述相符的洞穴。Though no specific site has been confirmed, many describe profound encounters with an expanded state of awareness, particularly inside subterranean spaces, linked to prehistoric rites. These experiences imply that the cavern is not a literal prison, but a metaphor for levels of awareness, accessible to anyone willing to forsake the self for the greater whole. Merlin's prophecies still echo in today's events, though they often demand deep interpretation rather than literal realization. His visions of Britain's role in world affairs, the cycles of empires, and the eventual union of material and spiritual insight now resonate in global politics, technological breakthroughs, and cultural shifts that mirror the patterns he once foresaw. This evening, as you reflect on your own ties to knowledge, power, wisdom, and duty, remember that Merlin's crystal cave exists wherever awareness expands beyond personal limits, while still rooted in a compassionate dedication to humanity's well-being. Britain's last sorcerer attained a cosmic viewpoint by severing human bonds, showing both the promise and peril of transcendent insight. Listen for the murmur of age-old wisdom threading through modern trials. Sense the burden of knowledge that goes beyond personal experience into a grasp of forces shaping collective fate. And bear in mind that somewhere beneath the Welsh hills, inside crystalline chambers outside normal space-time, the greatest wizard in history continues his eternal vigil, bridging human ambition and cosmic order. He guards wisdom too perilous for easy use, yet too vital to be abandoned entirely. And so our passage through England's shadow-infested landscapes comes to an end. Yet these ancient stories still resonate in the halls of modern consciousness, reminding us that beneath the surface of technology lie powers and truths no progress can wholly obscure. We strode with spring-heeled Jack through the gaslit alleys of Victorian London, where industrial confidence clashed with supernatural mayhem. We cowered before Black Shuck's blazing stare on the East Anglian fens, where cosmic justice prowls the line between holy and profane. We witnessed Hearn's endless chase through Windsor's primeval woods, where nature's guardians demand deference from those who seek to rule the wild. And we shuddered at the Lambton worm's devastating hunger, born from a careless insult to sacred waters. We stood in wonder before Mother Shipton's prophetic visions, where time itself warped to reveal humanity's coming crossroads and their fallout. We felt the heat of Wayland's supernatural forge, where divine craft meets mortal greed, with consequences spanning generations. And we glimpsed Merlin's cosmic mind, isolated in crystal chambers where limitless understanding carries the weight of endless solitude. What lessons have we drawn from these encounters with England's darker myths? That our forebears grasped truths about human ambition and natural law, that our tech-driven society has forgotten to its own peril. Each being we met is both terror and teacher, reflecting parts of ourselves we avoid but cannot escape. Spring-heeled Jack warns that progress without wisdom breeds its own monsters. The very technologies we hail as victories over primal fear can spawn new forms of dread and alienation. His unearthly agility mocks our belief that human cleverness has defeated all natural limits, while his blue flames illuminate the spiritual void beneath material abundance. Black Shuck teaches that cosmic justice follows laws older and more fundamental than human legal codes. His burning eye penetrates social masks to judge souls by standards that ignore wealth or status, weighing only the compassion in hearts that claim power over others. Hearn the Hunter embodies the return of nature's forces that industrial civilization tries to suppress but never fully controls. His antler crown marks him as a representative of powers that shaped Britain before humans arrived and will endure long after humanity fades into memory. The Lambton worm shows how small acts of casual cruelty toward the sacred can swell into catastrophes that threaten entire communities. Its regenerative ability mirrors how environmental problems multiply when addressed with shallow solutions that ignore root causes. Mother Shipton's prophecies reveal that the future is not an empty space waiting to be molded by human will, but a destination we approach through choices made in ignorance of their long-term consequences. Her prophetic visions act as a caution that certain paths, once started, become harder and harder to change. Juan the Smith reminds us that true creativity cannot be divorced from individual freedom. The best creations arise from inspiration, not force, from reverence, not exploitation. His brutal retribution against those seeking to enslave divine energies stands as a cautionary lesson regarding the unseen price of treating holy forces as mere possessions. And Merlin, the wizard, brought under control, embodies both the peak of human intellect and the ultimate boundary of detached wisdom lacking emotional bonds. His retreat into crystal halls illustrates this contradiction. Achieving a cosmic viewpoint by shedding human constraints may eventually disconnect us from the very people we aim to help. These myths endure not because our forebears were more gullible than us. Instead, they contain encoded truths about humanity and universal order that stay meaningful despite technological progress. They serve as reminders that certain limits must not be breached. Certain powers must never be exploited, and certain insights are granted only to the humble who understand their position within nature, not above it. In today's era of ecological collapse and technological upheaval, these Gothic narratives provide both caution and direction. They caution that viewing nature as a resource instead of a holy obligation creates effects far exceeding short-term reckoning. They caution that advancement lacking wisdom spawns horrors worse than the ignorance it aims to erase. They caution that authority without accountability always corrupts not only people, but whole societies. Yet they also provide direction for those trying to steer the dangerous path between timeless knowledge and modern demands. They instruct that true power is in service of justice, not selfish ambition. True understanding encompasses emotional and spiritual growth, not just intellectual amassing. They teach that enduring answers come from recognizing our role within greater designs, not from trying to control forces too vast to grasp. These stories also remind us that England is not merely a geographic region or political state. It is a storehouse of layered memory, a holy terrain where myriad generations have imprinted themselves on both land and shared psyche. The heaths and swamps, the old-growth woods and ancient stone structures that form the backdrop of these narratives still possess influence for those attuned enough to sense it. Contemporary visitors to these storied locations frequently recount incidents that mirror the original paranormal events. Whether these occurrences are genuine supernatural phenomena or mental projections is less important than their persistent capacity to alter perception and encourage awareness of forces beyond personal experience. The psychological reality of these myths resides not in factual correctness, but in their metaphorical strength, to link us to dimensions of existence that logical materialism often overlooks or rejects. They act as connections between the wakeful mind and the subconscious, between personal life and universal archetypes, between human drives and universal principles. If these eerie narratives have awakened you to the wisdom hidden within England's oldest myths, if they have unfolded your perception to energies still active underneath contemporary society, then hit subscribe and become part of the Ravenhurst community. Pass along these narratives to people who recognize that truth often wears the cloak of myth, that occasionally the deepest revelations come via accounts of beings that cannot possibly be real. Post a comment letting us know which of these English myths resonated with you the most, which dark figures will haunt your dreams tonight. And never forget, by subscribing, you join a timeless lineage, guardians of tales that must never fade, keepers of insights born from facing the darker facets of humanity and universal truth. The legends we delved into this evening keep transforming, adjusting to modern conditions. Yet they preserve their core ability to unsettle cozy beliefs regarding advancement, logic, and human mastery over nature. Spring Hill Jack leaps across cityscapes reshaped by global capitalism. The black shark roams regions endangered by shifting climates. Hern stalks through woodlands broken apart by human expansion. The lampworm awakens in waters tainted by industrial waste. Mother Shipton's predictions come to life in innovations she envisioned ages before they were built. Juan's forge blazes in every place where creative souls defy oppression. From his crystal cavern, a Merlin observes as mankind nears a junction he foresaw centuries earlier. These timeless sentinels remind us that certain realities surpass any single era. Certain cycles recur over millennia, and decisions reverberate across lineages in manners that short-term outcomes never disclose. They instruct that genuine insight arises not from conquering nature, but from recognizing our position within the greater rhythms that order all being. Until our next encounter within the candlelit halls of Gothic fancy, may your evenings be rich with fruitful fears, and your slumber visited by verities too deep for mere daytime reflection. The gloom conceals numerous revelations still hidden, and Obsidian Vault remains your steadfast escort through any obscurity that lies ahead. Rest peacefully, cherished audience, and recall that the finest creatures of nightmare are those that reveal genuine truths about our own nature. Ultimately, these old tales endure because they act as mirrors that reflect not merely the anxieties of earlier ages, but the timeless conflicts shaping human awareness, the strife between ambition and modesty, advancement and insight, personal longing, and universal order. England's fogs will forever shroud enigmas that logic alone can never completely clarify. The ancient megaliths will eternally recall ceremonies performed in an age when enchantment and existence were indistinguishable. And the elder deities will forever abide calmly for souls daring enough to admit that certain forces exceed human comprehension, while still being approachable by those who engage them with due reverence and acknowledgement. Recall that the most profound myths are those that reshape us through their narration, altering us instead of simply amusing. For within England's Gothic heritage resides knowledge forged over centuries of contending with powers that mold human fate from spheres beyond common sense. These are not just tales, but messages handed down by forebears who grasped that endurance demands not only bodily adjustment, but also spiritual growth. The acknowledgement that we belong to something infinitely grander and more enigmatic than any single life can embrace. The England that spawned these myths persists just under the veneer of contemporary existence, awaiting those with vision to perceive and spirits to comprehend that certain verities can be conveyed only via narratives of dread. That certain insights arise solely when we have the courage to gaze straight into the darkness encircling every human claim to understanding.